Look at her, crying for attention as always, my stepsister sneered, the sound sharp as cut china across the table. She snapped a video with that slow, satisfied smirk, like she'd practiced this exact moment a dozen times. Smile, baby, this is content. My daughter's small hands clutched the wooden rail, knuckles white, and for a second the room tuned out to a hollow hum, the clink of cutlery, the faint hiss of the radiator, my father's chewing like a metronome. My chest folded in on itself, an animal thing, all heat and sharp edges. I wanted to move, to pull her up, to erase the sting on her knee with my own skin. Instead I felt my body turn to glass my father could look through. Stop being dramatic, he said between bites, like he was correcting the volume on a radio. Hi everyone, my name is Marlo Sinclair. That line sounds too clean for the mess that was happening seconds before I learned the meaning of a family fracture that could snap a life in two. I watched my daughter, 11 and brave for reasons no child should need to be, wobble at the bottom of the steps while my stepsister's phone recorded the triumph, the humiliation, the way the light caught her hair as if to bless the cruelty. The laughter in that video would be the soundtrack that looped in my head for months, sharp and flat and impossible to scrub out. I remember the smell of boiled cabbage and lemon polish and how the wallpaper's faded roses blurred when I blinked. I remember the way my daughter's lip trembled when she asked me not to make a scene. She had already learned which battles would cost us more than dignity. I remember the clean angle of my father's jaw when he refused to look at us, like turning his face would be an admission that he had noticed anything at all. My hands had been in my lap, folded, because my mother taught me to fold my hands to hide shaking, because in that kitchen restraint felt like the only currency left to spend. But something inside me unstitched. Not fury like the movies. No screaming, no glass smashing, just a splintering logic. If the people at this table could watch my child fall and call it a joke, then the family that protected them would not protect me. Protection, I thought, is a contract you must write yourself. So I did something that none of them could imagine from someone who'd always been the quiet one. It would cost me everything they could tally. Money, reputation, those polite nods at funerals. It would cost me days measured by a calendar in a cell. But in that moment, with the phone still recording and my daughter looking up like the world had cracked open, I chose a kind of answer that would be impossible to film and easy to regret. I stood. The room inhaled. The phone kept rolling. The first sentence I said out loud changed everything. My voice didn't rise. It hardened. Delete that video, I said. My stepsister tilted her head, smirking. Or what? You'll ground me? You're not even real family. She laughed and pressed play again, my daughter's cry echoing from the screen like a wound replayed. I looked at my father. His fork clinked against the plate. He didn't look up. I realized then silence could be more violent than words. My daughter's small voice broke through it all. Mom, can we go home? And something inside me answered before my lips did. Yes, baby, but not yet. The world slowed down. The wallpaper's roses seemed to wilt in real time. I could smell the burnt gravy, the perfume of my stepmother, cheap lilac and something metallic underneath. It smelled like performance, like rot hidden beneath lace. My father muttered, "We're not done eating." That was when I understood. This wasn't just dinner. It was an audition for cruelty. I took my daughter's hand. Her fingers were trembling, her little wrist cold and damp from tears. I said calmly, "We're leaving." My stepmother's voice sliced through the air. "Sit down, Marlo. You're making a scene." A scene. That word. As if humiliation were theater and I was only allowed to watch. I turned toward her. "If you think this is a scene," I said, "wait for the ending." She laughed, thinking it was empty bravado. My father sighed, that weary patriarch sigh men use when their control starts slipping. But I was past control. I was somewhere colder, quieter, a place where clarity burns like frostbite. That night I didn't sleep. I replayed the shove, the cry, the laughter, the silence. I watched that video over and over until I memorized every pixel. The reflection of my father's face in the glass cabinet behind them. He wasn't eating. He was watching. Smiling faintly. By sunrise I had already made the first call. Not to the police. Not to a lawyer. To someone who owed me a favor from a lifetime I'd buried. And that was the moment the clock started ticking. Counting down to the 245 days that would erase everything they thought they owned. The man who picked up the phone that morning hadn't heard from me in 10 years. His voice was older, slower, but still carried that familiar gravel of someone who'd seen too much. "Marlo Sinclair," he said, like saying my name summoned old ghosts. Didn't think I'd ever hear from you again. People change, I told him. But not always for the better. There was silence, then a low whistle. What do you need? Proof, I said. And maybe a little justice. He didn't ask questions. He never had to. His name was Elliot. Once he'd been my late husband's business partner. The kind who could find anything anywhere for the right reason. I sent him the video. The file that changed everything. He called back 2 hours later. You sure you want to open this door, Marlo? Once you start, you can't go back. I'm already inside, I said. The plan wasn't impulsive. It was precise. Every laugh, every insult, every moment they dismissed me had built this blueprint. The people who called me overreactive had no idea how quiet planning sounded. Over the next week, I gathered pieces, receipts, messages, phone logs, that smug recording my stepsister posted privately to her friends. Elliot helped me trace where it spread, who shared it, who commented. They thought it was private humiliation. They had no idea what public disgrace felt like. But I didn't just want revenge. I wanted exposure, the kind that left no room for denial. My daughter would never see me beg again. I stayed silent, kept working, building a case disguised as calm motherhood. I smiled at neighbors, packed school lunches, attended PTA meetings. No one saw the storm quietly forming behind my composure. The night before everything broke, I stood at the window, watching my reflection fade into the dark. My daughter slept soundly in her room. I whispered to the glass, "You'll never cry like that again, baby." Then I sent one final message to Elliot. Tomorrow, 7 p.m. start the upload. The reply came in seconds. Once it's out there, there's no undoing it. I typed back one word. Good. At exactly 7 p.m. I sat in my car outside my father's house. The same house where my daughter's tears had echoed off the stairs. From the window I could see the familiar glow of the dining room chandelier. Too bright, too polished, too proud. Inside, laughter. Forks clinking. The same ugly symphony of denial. I pulled my phone out, my hands steady in a way that scared even me. Elliot's message appeared, uploading now. The file was titled Family Dinner, Truth in Motion. The video began with my stepsister's laughter. The cry. My father's voice calling my daughter, dramatic. My stepmother's smirk. All of it, crystal clear, unedited. But Elliot had added something they didn't expect. He'd layered in their private chats. The mocking texts, the voice notes, the comments about how she's too sensitive, needs to toughen up. It was all synchronized perfectly with the video. Frame by frame. Within minutes, it hit social media. The sound of my phone buzzing felt like thunder. Notifications poured in. Outrage, disgust, sympathy. Hashtags forming like wildfire. My father's company name trending. My stepsister's influencer sponsorships vanishing one by one. I didn't gloat. I just watched. Watched the truth do what silence never could. By the time my phone rang, I already knew it would be him. My father. What did you do, Marlo? He demanded, his voice cracking under the weight of exposure. What you called dramatic, I said. The world calls evidence. He cursed me, told me I'd ruined him. I listened to his fury like it was music. A song written in justice. That night, police cars lined his driveway. The neighbors filmed everything just as he'd watched my daughter being filmed. I saw my stepsister cry for the first time, not out of pain but out of consequence. I should have felt satisfied. Instead I felt nothing. Just an echo. Justice had a strange silence to it. I looked at my reflection in the car mirror. Tired, hollow, free. Then I whispered, "It's done." But it wasn't. Because the next morning they pressed charges. And I was the one they wanted in handcuffs. The knock came just after sunrise. 3 sharp hits, the kind that slice through sleep and leave your heart racing before you're even awake. My daughter stirred beside me, whispering, "Mom?" I pressed a finger to my lips. "It's okay, sweetheart." But it wasn't. When I opened the door, 2 officers stood on the porch, badges catching the pale morning light. "Marlo Sinclair?" "Yes. You're under arrest for defamation, cyber harassment, and unauthorized data release." My world froze. Not shattered, just paused, like a movie buffering at its worst moment. My father's influence ran deep. Deeper than I'd imagined. My daughter screamed as they cuffed me, her tiny hands gripping the frame of the door. I kept my eyes on her. "You're safe," I whispered. "Remember that. You're safe." They took my phone, my freedom, my name, turned it into a headline. Mother exposes family, faces jail. The irony made me laugh, but only once, in the back of the patrol car, before silence swallowed everything again. Jail wasn't what I expected. It wasn't cruelty, it was emptiness. A world built from routine and regret. You learn the rhythm fast. 6 a.m. roll call, 8 a.m. breakfast, the hum of fluorescent lights that never dim. Nights were the hardest when memory crawled in like a cold wind. Sometimes I'd close my eyes and hear my father's voice. Stop being dramatic. He was probably sitting in his lawyer's office, building walls of paperwork around his guilt. I imagined him watching interviews, denying, performing remorse like a man rehearsing a role. Elliot visited once. Sat across the glass divider, eyes heavy. They're twisting the story, he said. But public opinion's on your side. They can't keep you forever. I don't want sympathy, I replied. I want the truth to hurt the right people. He nodded. It already is. I smiled faintly. Then let them think I'm the villain. Sometimes the villain's the only one brave enough to act. When the guards led me back to my cell, I felt something strange. Not shame. Not fear. It was peace. The kind that comes when your chains tell the truth for you. 2 weeks into my sentence, letters began to arrive. Some were from strangers. Women who'd seen the video and whispered, "Thank you for standing up when no one stood for us." Some were from enemies. Relatives calling me a disgrace, telling me I'd destroyed the family's name. I pinned the first kind on my wall and burned the second kind in my mind. Every night, my daughter's drawings came folded in envelopes, bright suns and uneven hearts. "Mom," she wrote, "the mean girl at school said you're famous. I told her you're a hero." That line became my prayer. Elliot visited again. His eyes said what his words didn't. The case was turning. My father's company was under investigation. The evidence that leaked from the video had opened other doors. Doors I hadn't even known existed. "You're not the only one on trial anymore," he told me. "How bad?" I asked. He smirked. Bad enough for him to know what humiliation tastes like. That night, I lay on my cot staring at the ceiling's cracks, each one like a road leading out of guilt. The women around me whispered stories. Mothers, sisters, daughters, each with a version of silence forced upon them. I realized I wasn't alone. My story was just one verse in a larger confession. I started writing, not for revenge but remembrance. Every page was a mirror, every word a step toward the door I would someday walk through again. Then one morning I was called to the warden's office. The air smelled like disinfectant and surprise. She said, "Your appeal went through. Sentence reduced. You're going home, Marlowe." I didn't cry. I just nodded. Walking out of that gate felt like stepping through fog into sunlight. The reporters waited, their cameras hungry. Someone shouted, "Do you regret what you did?" I looked straight into the lens and said, "Regret? No." But I learned that truth always demands a receipt. What I didn't tell them was that I had one last delivery left to make, and it was waiting in my father's mailbox. The house looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I'd just grown taller in the silence of those 245 days. The paint was peeling, the garden dry, the laughter gone. My father's nameplate was still on the gate, but someone had scratched through it. The mark looked deliberate, like the universe signing off on poetic irony. I stood at the mailbox, envelope in hand. Inside was everything he'd pretended to bury. His forged signatures, his offshore transfers, the proof of how he'd used my late husband's assets to fund his own empire. Elliot had dug it all out while I served time. I told him not to, but he'd said, "Justice doesn't stop when the gavel drops." The envelope wasn't meant to destroy him. It was meant to end the performance. I slipped it into the mailbox, turned to leave, and there he was. My father, older, thinner, his arrogance cracked. "You've done enough damage," he rasped. "No, Dad," I said quietly. "You did." His eyes, once made of glass, now looked human for the first time. "You think jail made you righteous?" "No," I said, "it made me free." He stepped closer. "You ruined your family's name." I met his stare. No. I just stopped pretending it was clean. Behind him, my stepsister appeared in the doorway. Her once perfect hair was a mess, her eyes rimmed red. "You're proud of this, aren't you?" she spat. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She'd lived her whole life in front of a camera. Now she was finally out of frame. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. My daughter waited in the car watching. I walked back to her, slow, steady, unshaken. "Did you say goodbye?" she asked softly. I smiled faintly. "No. Some people don't deserve a goodbye." As we drove away, I glanced once more in the rearview mirror. My father stood motionless on the porch, holding the envelope he'd never expected. The sky broke open in thunder. And for the first time he flinched. But the real storm was still coming, and this time it wasn't mine. 3 weeks later the storm arrived, not in rain but in headlines. Business tycoon under fraud investigation. Family empire collapses amid scandal. Every lie he'd built on my silence unraveled in public view. His partners withdrew. His accounts froze. My stepsister vanished from social media, deleting the life she'd curated frame by frame. And my father, the man who once called me dramatic, faced cameras outside a courthouse, his trembling hand shielding his face. I didn't watch the trial. I didn't need to. The world was finally watching him the way I'd watched him all my life. Unblinking, unmoved. Instead I focused on rebuilding. I got my daughter back into therapy, found a small apartment near the coast and started painting again. Something I hadn't done since before I was Marlo Sinclair, the woman who went to jail for the truth. The first thing I painted was a staircase. Half in shadow, half in light. My daughter named it Rise Again. Some nights I'd hear the echo of her laughter, healed now, no longer laced with fear. And every time she hugged me goodnight she'd whisper, "We're free, Mom." Those words became my new heartbeat. Elliot stopped by one evening, bringing takeout and quiet company. "They offered you compensation," he said, sliding a letter across the table. "A public apology too." I smiled. "Tell them to keep both. I already got what I came for." He nodded slowly. "Peace." "Clarity," I corrected. "Peace will take time." After he left, I walked out to the balcony, watching the waves hit the shore, steady, endless, cleansing. My reflection in the glass no longer looked haunted. Just honest. I thought about the dinner, the stares, the laughter, the silence. Every cruelty that tried to define me had only carved space for something truer. Something stronger. My father once told me I'd always be the dramatic one. He was right. Because it takes a bit of drama to survive a family that feeds on your silence. And this time the final act belonged to me.